I started my business with $500 in a dream. Here's how it all unfolded. A few years ago, I was in a miserable position. I was working a dead-end job, just scraping by. My manager, a man with zero leadership skills, made the workplace toxic. The pay was low, and every day felt like an endless cycle of monotony. I was working at a call center, making just enough to cover my rent, bills, and food, with barely any left over for anything else. At the time, I was stuck in a rut, and if you asked me about my future, I would have had no idea where I was heading. One day, I was sitting at my desk, the dull hum of phones ringing around me when I overheard a colleague talking about starting a business. She had just sold a few handmade candles online and was talking about how she had made a decent profit. It was a simple conversation, but something inside me sparked. I had been feeling miserable for months, and here was someone I knew, who was building something for themselves, carving out their own path. I went home that day and started researching. I spent hours reading about small businesses, side hustles, and the possibilities of making money outside of the traditional 9 to 5 grind. One thing led to another, and I stumbled upon a YouTube video of a guy who started a business selling phone accessories from his garage. He talked about how he bootstrapped everything, starting with almost nothing. It hit me hard. If he could do it, why couldn't I? I didn't have a lot of capital to start with, but I had a strong work ethic and an idea that I was passionate about. I wanted to start an e-commerce store. I was fascinated by the idea of selling products online, and after some research, I realized that the barrier to entry wasn't as high as I thought. I didn't need thousands of dollars in inventory up front. I could use a drop shipping model where the supplier shipped the products directly to the customer. So, with $500 to my name, I took a leap of faith. I spent $100 on setting up a basic website. I had no experience in web design, so I used Shopify, a platform that was user-friendly and offered tons of tutorials. The remaining money went into advertising and buying sample products to review. I knew that if I was going to sell these products, I needed to believe in them first. My store was modest at first. I sold custom phone cases, phone accessories, and some other tech gadgets. My goal was simple: make enough money to quit my job and do something I actually enjoyed. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was committed. I spent hours every day tweaking my website, adjusting the product descriptions, and learning about digital marketing. I learned about Facebook and Instagram ads, how to use Google Analytics, and what SEO was. I poured my evenings into creating content and running ads. It wasn't until the third week that I made my first sale. I couldn't believe it. A random person on the internet had purchased a product from my store. That small win was enough to keep me going. Every day, I checked my sales numbers, constantly trying to improve my ads and my strategy. I had a moment of disbelief when I saw my first $100 day, then a $200 day, and then $500. The revenue slowly began to climb. But even with those small successes, the journey was never smooth. There were plenty of failures along the way. I had products that didn't sell. I tried a few Facebook ad campaigns that lost me money. I even had customers who didn't receive their orders on time, which resulted in angry emails and complaints. I remember one time, I had to refund someone after they claimed they didn't receive their order, but I couldn't prove whether they were lying or not. I felt so discouraged, but instead of giving up, I chose to improve. I set up better tracking and communication systems. At the 6-month mark, I had grown my side business to the point where I was making enough to cover my living expenses. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was enough to show me that I could do this full time. It was the first time in my life that I realized that with enough effort, I could be my own boss and make a living doing something I loved. The turning point came when I reached out to a mentor, someone I had met at a local business seminar. She had been in the e-commerce space for over 10 years and had built a multi-million-dollar business. She took a chance on me and agreed to work with me. She gave me advice on scaling my business, finding more reliable suppliers, and refining my marketing strategy. I took everything she said to heart and implemented it immediately. I used her advice to refine my ad targeting, improve the user experience on my website, and adjust my product offerings. It wasn't an overnight success, but over the next year, my revenue doubled. I was able to quit my call center job. I remember the day I walked into my manager's office and handed in my resignation letter. It was surreal, but even after quitting my job, I still faced challenges. The competition in the e-commerce space was fierce, and I had to keep innovating to stay ahead. I started introducing new products to my store, expanded my social media presence, and began doing email marketing. I also scaled my team, hiring freelancers for customer service and social media management. My overhead costs increased, but so did my profits. The biggest challenge came when I had to manage the logistics of scaling. My suppliers couldn't keep up with demand, and I had to scramble to find new ones. Shipping times were slow, and customers started to complain. That's when I decided to go for a more hands-on approach and work directly with a manufacturer. It cost more upfront, but it allowed me to control the quality and shipping times. The results were worth it. My store gained a reputation for reliable products and fast shipping, and I started getting repeat customers. Today, I run a thriving e-commerce business. What started as a $500 investment is now a multi-six-figure business that continues to grow every year. It's been a roller coaster of highs and lows, but looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. The key was persistence. Every time I faced a roadblock, I found a way to overcome it. Now, I mentor other aspiring entrepreneurs who want to start their own businesses. I love helping others avoid the mistakes I made and showing them how to build their own success. If I've learned one thing, it's that you don't need a lot of money to start a business, but you need a lot of determination. If I can do it, anyone can. Entrepreneurship isn't easy, but it's the most rewarding thing I've ever done. The journey continues, and I'm excited for what the future holds. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. This is the story of how I went from struggling to pay rent to building a multi-million-dollar e-commerce business, all thanks to one late-night decision to stop dreaming and start doing. Grab some popcorn, because this is going to be a long one. I was never the type of person who thought they'd become an entrepreneur. In fact, I spent most of my childhood thinking the idea of running a business was only for the ultra-wealthy or people with perfect connections. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest where the dream was to get a steady job and live a peaceful, comfortable life. My parents worked hard, my dad in construction, my mom in retail, and their goal for me was simple: get a degree, get a job, and avoid struggles. They meant well, but the idea of a typical 9-to-5 life never sat right with me. I wanted more, but I didn't know what more even meant back then. After high school, I went to college. Like most students, I spent my first few semesters juggling courses with a part-time job. By the time I was nearing graduation, I found myself deep in debt from student loans and credit cards. That didn't deter me. I was ready to jump into the workforce with the knowledge I'd gained. But the job market was brutal. I applied to countless positions in marketing, sales, and even customer service. I heard nothing but silence. That's when reality hit me. I had a degree, but the world didn't seem to care. One day, after yet another rejection email, I sat in my tiny apartment feeling defeated. I was 25, living paycheck to paycheck, and staring at a mountain of debt. The worst part? I felt trapped. I knew I didn't want to work a job I hated for the next 40 years, but I didn't have a clue where to start. That night, something clicked. I had been spending so much energy trying to make a traditional career work, but what if there was another way? I had no idea what that looked like, but I needed to find out. So I did what anyone with limited funds and too much time on their hands would do. I started researching online business ideas. I spent nights reading articles, watching YouTube videos, and listening to podcasts. I stumbled across the world of e-commerce, specifically dropshipping. At first, I was skeptical. How could I sell products without holding inventory? Was it even legal? But the more I dug into it, the more it made sense. The idea that I could run a business from my laptop with little overhead seemed too good to pass up. It wasn't an instant success, though. I'll admit, the first few months were a blur of mistakes, learning curves, and plenty of failures. The first product I sold was a phone case, and I was beyond excited when someone actually purchased it. But that excitement quickly turned to panic when I realized I had no idea how to fulfill the order. I ended up spending hours trying to figure out how to contact my supplier, only to realize I had selected the wrong one. The order was late, and my customer wasn't happy. I refunded them and swallowed the loss, but I didn't give up. I had to learn the hard way about how dropshipping works. There were many nights where I stayed up until 3 a.m. trying to optimize my Shopify store, watching tutorials, tweaking ads, and dealing with returns. But gradually, things started to click. I found a few winning products, like a quirky kitchen gadget, and sales began to trickle in. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. The real breakthrough came when I figured out Facebook ads. I had spent a lot of money testing different ad strategies, but when I finally found the right audience and copy, my sales skyrocketed. That was the turning point. Once I figured out how to scale my ads and automate the process, I started making consistent sales. I was no longer just paying rent. I was making enough money to quit my part-time job. In fact, I had a full-fledged business on my hands, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like a hustle, and that was exciting. Over the next year, I kept growing. I started experimenting with other business models like affiliate marketing and selling digital products. By now, I had invested in coaching programs, and I learned about building email lists, improving my website's SEO, and creating brand partnerships. The more I learned, the more I realized there was so much more to e-commerce than just selling random products. You had to build a brand, and a brand had to have a mission. I began to narrow down my focus, and that's when everything clicked. I transitioned from selling random gadgets to curating a brand around self-care and lifestyle products. It wasn't easy, no success story is, but the hard work paid off. I scaled my business to 6 figures within 2 years. I had a team of 5 working with me, handling customer service, marketing, and operations. I was finally doing what I had always dreamed of, creating something that was truly mine. But success didn't come without its challenges. The biggest challenge I faced was burnout. After reaching 6 figures, I started to lose sight of the bigger picture. I was caught in the trap of constantly chasing revenue, working long hours, and forgetting why I started the business in the first place. I was neglecting my personal life, my health, and my mental well-being. One day, I had to take a step back and reflect. I realized I had been running on fumes for months. So, I took a break. I set up systems to automate as much of the business as possible, hired a few more people to help with daily tasks, and took a much-needed vacation. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. When I came back, I was refreshed, focused, and ready to push the business to new heights. I spent the next few months working on improving the customer experience, building a strong social media community, and launching new products that aligned with my brand values. Fast forward to today. My business generates millions in revenue, and I've been able to diversify my investments into real estate, stocks, and even mentoring other aspiring entrepreneurs. I now have the freedom to travel, spend time with my family, and work on projects that truly excite me. What started as a side hustle from my small apartment has transformed into something I'm incredibly proud of. But the most valuable lesson I've learned throughout this journey is that success doesn't come from having the perfect plan or the best product. It comes from persistence, a willingness to learn from your mistakes, and the ability to adapt when things go wrong. If I had given up after my first failure, or if I had let the doubts and rejections crush me, I would have never gotten here. So, to anyone reading this who feels stuck or unsure about starting their own business, just do it. The road isn't easy, but it's worth it. Take that first step. It won't be perfect, but every failure will teach you something valuable. And when you finally succeed, you'll know it was all worth it. I'm an entrepreneur who started with $0, a passion for coffee, and a deep desire to escape the 9 to 5 grind. It all began 6 years ago, and today I run a thriving coffee roastery and cafe chain. But trust me when I say it was nothing like the picture-perfect success story you see on Instagram. It was messy, uncertain, and full of mistakes that, in hindsight, taught me more than any textbook could. Here's how it all went down. Back in 2019, I was working as an account manager at a mid-sized tech company. The job paid well, but I had this feeling in the pit of my stomach that I was meant for something else. I loved coffee, really loved it. I'd been an avid coffee drinker since college, and after getting my first espresso machine, I dove headfirst into learning everything about beans, roasts, brewing techniques, and the entire coffee supply chain. I quickly became obsessed. I spent my weekends visiting local coffee shops, talking to baristas, and reading up on the global coffee industry. But there was a problem. Coffee culture in my city was stale. Most coffee shops served subpar brews and didn't take much pride in the beans they used. And despite being a coffee lover, I couldn't find a single place that really got it right. So, I decided to take a leap of faith and start my own. The first challenge was money. I had zero savings and no idea how to get started with such a huge venture. I wasn't naive enough to think I could open a coffee shop with no funds, but I was determined. I started small by roasting beans out of my tiny apartment. My first roaster was an old popcorn machine I modified to handle small batches. It was completely ridiculous, but it worked. Every weekend, I would roast beans and invite friends over to try the different blends I was experimenting with. They loved it, and that gave me the confidence to keep going. After several months of trial and error, and many failed attempts where I burned whole batches, I figured out how to consistently roast beans that tasted incredible. Then, I needed to figure out how to sell them. With no startup capital, I couldn't afford a brick-and-mortar store or even a proper website. So, I turned to social media. I created an Instagram account and posted videos of my roasting process, shots of my coffee setup, and a few behind-the-scenes glimpses of my life as a coffee entrepreneur. People loved the authenticity of it, and before long, I had a small but loyal following. I started selling bags of coffee through Instagram DMs. At first, it was just friends and family, but slowly, people started sharing my posts, and word of mouth spread. I remember packaging my first few orders in the living room, tying each bag with a little twine, and hand-delivering them to customers on my bike. It was a grind, but it was also exhilarating. Each order felt like a tiny victory. But then, in early 2020, the pandemic hit. The world came to a screeching halt, and everything I thought I knew about business was turned upside down. The coffee scene was hit especially hard. Local cafes closed their doors, and many small coffee roasters went out of business. I found myself staring at a mountain of roasted beans with no way to sell them. My apartment was full of bags of coffee, and I had no idea what to do. Instead of giving up, I pivoted. People were stuck at home and craving comfort, and I knew coffee could be that comfort. I launched a subscription service, an at-home coffee experience, where customers could receive a different bag of coffee every month, along with tasting notes, brewing tips, and personalized recommendations. I spent days building a simple website on Shopify and setting up a payment system. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. The response was overwhelming. People were looking for ways to enjoy quality coffee at home, and my subscription service gave them just that. The orders began pouring in. I had to borrow my friend's van to deliver bags to local customers, and I started hiring part-time help to pack and ship orders. That small pivot saved my business, and it helped me grow in ways I never anticipated. But running a coffee business wasn't all sunshine and roses. In 2021, I realized I needed to scale up. I couldn't keep roasting from my tiny apartment anymore, and I needed to hire staff, source larger quantities of beans, and create a more professional brand. I took a big risk by renting a commercial kitchen space and purchasing a proper roaster. The initial costs were overwhelming, and I felt like I was drowning in debt. To make matters worse, a supplier I'd trusted delivered a batch of beans that were subpar. My customers complained, and I had to issue refunds. It felt like everything I had worked for was slipping through my fingers. I didn't know how much longer I could keep up the grind. But somehow, I pulled through. I found new suppliers who shared my commitment to quality, and I focused on building stronger relationships with my customers. I reached out to people who had complained and made it right. Slowly, the trust one had built with my small but loyal customer base began to pay off. People appreciated that I was transparent, that I cared about the product, and that I was committed to learning and improving. It wasn't always easy, but by 2022, my little coffee business was growing faster than I had imagined. That's when I realized that it wasn't just about selling coffee, it was about creating an experience. I wanted to offer people more than just a cup of coffee. I wanted to build a brand that represented quality, community, and a deep respect for the craft. So, in late 2022, I opened my first brick-and-mortar cafe. The cafe was nothing like I had imagined. The space was small, cozy, and filled with mismatched furniture. The layout was simple, but the vibe was warm and inviting. I served the same coffee I had been roasting and selling online, but now people could come in, sip, chat, and connect. We even started hosting weekend events like coffee cupping sessions, brewing workshops, and live acoustic music. The cafe became a gathering spot for coffee lovers, creatives, and anyone who wanted a taste of something new. Today, my coffee roastery and cafe chain has expanded to 4 locations across the city. We've developed our own line of merchandise, including branded mugs, shirts, and brewing equipment. Our subscription service continues to grow, and I'm now able to focus on other ventures, like sustainability efforts and collaborations with local farmers to source direct trade beans. We've even started offering franchising opportunities, so others can build their own coffee businesses based on the same principles that made mine a success. Looking back, the road to where I am today wasn't easy. I made countless mistakes, lost money, and doubted myself more times than I can count. But each setback was an opportunity to learn and grow. If I had given up during the tough times, I wouldn't be where I am now. The key to success, I've learned, isn't about avoiding failure. It's about persevering through it, learning from it, and always finding ways to improve. If there's one thing I can tell you from my journey, it's this: start small, stay authentic, and never stop learning. Entrepreneurship isn't easy, but it's worth it. If you're passionate about something, follow that passion, and the rest will follow. It's been a wild ride, but I wouldn't change a thing. I was 23, freshly out of college, and living in a rundown apartment in a city that was both overwhelming and exhilarating. My degree was in marketing, and for a while, I worked for a small startup that was supposed to be the next big thing. It wasn't. The company went under after about a year, and I was left jobless, with no safety net. Like most people, I had a decision to make. I could either look for another job, which I didn't really want, or take a leap of faith and start something on my own. At that time, I had zero business experience. I wasn't even sure where to start, but I had a few things going for me. I knew marketing well, I had a small amount of savings from my old job, and I was incredibly stubborn. My big idea came when I noticed how difficult it was for small businesses to effectively market themselves on social media. Everyone was using Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, but no one knew how to optimize those platforms to get actual sales. I thought, why not create a service that helps businesses grow their social media presence without needing to be experts? I had a background in running ads and building content strategies, so it seemed like a perfect fit. It was early 2014, and the digital marketing world was still young. Small businesses were scrambling to figure out how to use social media, and there was a clear gap in the market for affordable, effective help. I didn't have much capital to work with, just a few $1,000s from my savings. So I started small. I bought a laptop and set up a website on WordPress, keeping everything as low cost as possible. I didn't have an office or even a proper desk. In fact, for the first several months, I worked from my car or local coffee shops. My 1997 Corolla became my mobile office. The first few months were rough. I didn't have clients, and I certainly didn't have a steady income. I reached out to every small business I could find, sending cold emails with a personalized pitch. Most people didn't respond. Some even laughed at me, but I was relentless. Every no only fueled my determination to keep going. After weeks of effort, I finally landed my first client, a local coffee shop that needed help with Instagram. They were spending money on ads, but their posts weren't driving any traffic or sales. I took the job, and honestly, I had no idea what I was doing at first. But I did what I could. I analyzed their audience, came up with a content calendar, and ran targeted ads. Within 3 weeks, they saw a noticeable increase in foot traffic and sales. They were thrilled, and that led to another referral. Slowly, I started building a small portfolio. The breakthrough came when I started getting attention from larger businesses, some of them in the restaurant and e-commerce space. At first, I couldn't believe it. These were clients who had real budgets and big expectations. I was scared out of my mind, but I knew I couldn't let this opportunity slip away. I doubled down, poured everything I had into making those clients happy. I stayed up late, watched countless YouTube tutorials, and even paid for some high-end courses on digital marketing. One of the first big wins was a local restaurant chain that was struggling to get people to their new locations. I completely overhauled their social media strategy and ran geo-targeted ads that brought in a surge of customers. The owner was so impressed that they introduced me to several other restaurant owners. From there, things just snowballed. With each new client, I learned more, grew my skills, and became more confident. By the end of 2015, I had hired my first employee, a friend who had been with me since the beginning. We worked out of a tiny office that I could barely afford, but it was enough to feel like we were moving up. I couldn't believe how much we had grown in just 1 year. Still, there were challenges. Managing clients was one thing, but managing a team? That was a whole new ballgame. I learned the hard way how important it is to communicate clearly, set expectations, and foster a positive company culture. I made some mistakes along the way, but every failure was a learning opportunity. It wasn't until 2017 that we really started seeing some traction. By then, I had about 10 full-time employees, and we were bringing in serious revenue. I invested in advertising for our own company, expanded our service offerings, and worked on scaling efficiently. The business was still small compared to the big players, but we were carving out our niche and making a name for ourselves in the local market. Then, in 2018, things changed again. I got a call from a potential investor who had seen our work and wanted to talk about backing us for expansion. I'll be honest, my first reaction was panic. I was used to bootstrapping everything, and the thought of giving up a part of the company was terrifying. But after many discussions with mentors and advisors, I decided to take the plunge. It was the best decision I ever made. With the investors' backing, we were able to bring in even more talent, upgrade our software tools, and start taking on clients nationwide. We rebranded the company, launched a slick new website, and hired a full-fledged sales team. It was a game changer. We went from a small, local service provider to a competitive player in the national digital marketing space. By 2020, the business had grown to the point where we were managing campaigns for well-known brands and industries ranging from health and wellness to fashion and tech. Revenue was growing steadily, and we were on track to hit the seven-figure mark. Looking back, I can't help but feel a mix of pride and gratitude. I started with nothing but a desire to help small businesses succeed, and now I'm running a company that does just that on a much larger scale. There were sleepless nights, endless hours of hard work, and moments when I thought about quitting. But I didn't. I didn't let fear stop me. I kept pushing forward, kept learning, and kept hustling. In 2021, I sold a portion of the company to another larger firm, but I stayed on as CEO. It was a bittersweet moment, letting go of a part of what I built from the ground up, but it was the right move for both me and the business. We're now focused on even bigger things, expanding into new markets, and continuing to innovate. My advice to anyone thinking about starting their own business is simple. Start. You don't need a perfect plan, and you don't need to have everything figured out. You just need to take that first step. Don't be afraid to fail, because you will. But it's the failures that teach you the most. And, most importantly, stay persistent. Your idea might not be a hit at first, but if you keep improving, adapting, and hustling, success will follow. So here I am now, still doing what I love, but with a deeper appreciation for the grind. If you're in the early stages of your entrepreneurial journey, hang in there. Your big break might be just around the corner. Keep going and trust the process. It'll be worth it in the end. I was broke, living in a dingy apartment with peeling walls, and barely scraping by. I never thought that one day, I'd be sitting in a shiny office with a view of the skyline, running a multi-million-dollar business. This is my journey, one that started from nothing and was full of twists, turns, and plenty of failures. It all started when I was 25. I had just gotten out of a dead-end job working at a call center, where the most exciting part of my day was when the air conditioning broke. I had dreams, big ones, but I didn't know where to start. I always thought starting a business was something that required a huge amount of money, connections, or luck, none of which I had. What I did have was a strong sense of dissatisfaction and an itch to create something of my own. I was reading business books, articles, and listening to podcasts in my spare time, and one thing became clear. People who were successful often started with something small and built on it. They didn't have it all figured out at first. One day, I stumbled upon a podcast where an entrepreneur talked about how they started their company with just $100 in a vision. That was the moment that shifted my mindset. If they could do it, why couldn't I? But the problem was, I didn't have a clue what kind of business I wanted to start. I didn't have a product idea, nor did I have any experience in creating one. All I had was a desire to get out of my situation and be free from the 9-to-5 grind. I started small. The first thing I did was research. I didn't have the capital to create a groundbreaking product, but I knew I had to offer something that people wanted or needed. After some research, I landed on a niche idea, custom-designed t-shirts. It wasn't a groundbreaking idea, but it seemed low risk and something I could start with minimal investment. I began by designing a few shirts that reflected my own style, using free tools online. I didn't have a fancy design background, but I was resourceful. I used print-on-demand services, so I didn't need to worry about stocking inventory or upfront costs. The only thing I had to focus on was the marketing, and that's where my real hustle started. I knew I needed to get my product in front of as many people as possible, but I didn't have a huge budget for advertising. So, I turned to social media. I started an Instagram page, posting my designs and engaging with people. I didn't just post pictures of the shirts. I shared my journey, my struggles, and the reality of being a young entrepreneur trying to make it. The authenticity seemed to resonate with people. Slowly but surely, I started making sales. It wasn't much at first, just a few orders every week, but it was something. And that something was enough to keep me motivated. I started reinvesting the little money I made into expanding my designs and improving the quality of my products. Eventually, I built up a small following, and the sales began to grow. But the real turning point came when I took a leap and hired a freelancer to help me with more professional marketing. I still didn't have a lot of money, so I started with a small budget, but it paid off. The freelancer helped me create a better website, write compelling copy, and most importantly, develop an email marketing strategy. I also began running small Facebook ads targeting people who liked similar brands and products. That was when the real magic happened. I'll never forget the first day I woke up to a notification that I had made $1,000 in sales while I was sleeping. It was a surreal moment. It wasn't a massive sum of money, but it was enough to prove to me that this could work. I began focusing even more on my marketing, experimenting with different ad strategies, collaborating with influencers, and learning everything I could about online marketing. Despite the progress, things weren't always smooth sailing. There were plenty of setbacks along the way. One of the most challenging periods came when I received a cease and desist letter from a well-known clothing brand claiming that my designs were too similar to theirs. I was devastated. I hadn't intentionally copied anything, but I didn't have the resources to fight a legal battle. I took the letter seriously, pulled down the designs, and started from scratch. The legal issues set me back, but it also forced me to reassess my business and make sure everything I was doing was above board. I took it as a lesson to always double-check my designs and be mindful of intellectual property laws. It was a tough lesson, but it made me stronger. As I continued to grow the business, I started thinking bigger. I realized that to scale, I would need to focus on customer retention, not just acquisition. I began offering discounts for repeat customers, creating loyalty programs, and launching limited edition designs that made people feel like they were part of an exclusive club. These strategies helped me create a more engaged community around my brand. But the real breakthrough came when I started collaborating with influencers in my niche. I began sending free t-shirts to people with large followings on Instagram, asking them to post about my brand. Some said yes, others didn't respond, but slowly, I began seeing an uptick in orders. A few months later, I had secured a partnership with a well-known influencer in the fashion world. That one collaboration skyrocketed my sales to levels I never imagined. By the time I turned 30, I had quit my full-time job and was running my business full-time. I had a small team, a warehouse, and enough revenue to live comfortably. I was still grinding every day, but the difference was that I was working for myself, and it felt amazing. Looking back, the journey wasn't easy, and it still isn't. There are days when I doubt myself, when sales dip, or when a new competitor enters the market and threatens to steal my customers. But every time I encounter an obstacle, I remind myself of how far I've come. The key to entrepreneurship, I've learned, is persistence. It's about showing up every day, even when things aren't going well. And most importantly, it's about adapting and being willing to learn from your mistakes. I never imagined I would be where I am today. I didn't have any special advantages or connections. What I had was a relentless drive, a willingness to take risks, and the ability to learn from my failures. If there's one thing I want anyone reading this to take away, it's this. If I can do it, so can you. No matter how small or insignificant you think your idea is, if you're willing to put in the work, you can build something great. It's a long, hard road, but it's worth it. Don't give up. The best part of the journey is seeing how far you've come, and that's something you can't put a price on. I've been an entrepreneur for over 10 years now, but my journey didn't start the way most people think. My first business wasn't a tech startup or a product-based venture. It was a small local cleaning service. When I started, I had no idea how hard running a business would be or how many times I would want to quit. But I learned more from those failures than I ever could from my successes. So, if you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, here's my story. Maybe it'll help you avoid some of the mistakes I made. It all began when I was in college. I was working part-time at a cafe, barely scraping by, and I had zero real career prospects. One day, my friend Rachel told me she was thinking about starting a cleaning business. She had heard that there was a big demand for cleaning services in our town, and after doing some research, She thought it could be a good way to make extra cash. Rachel was the kind of person who always had big ideas but never followed through on them, so I didn't think much of it at first. But then Rachel started talking about how easy it would be to start. We didn't need a lot of capital, just cleaning supplies, a few customers, and some marketing. She said, "You know, you're good at organizing things. Maybe we should just go for it." That struck a chord with me. I didn't want to be stuck in the cafe forever, and the idea of running my own business felt like a breath of fresh air. So I agreed. We started the business with almost no money and no real experience. Our initial investment was a couple $100 for basic supplies and some flyers to put around town. We weren't professional cleaners by any means. I had no idea what I was doing, but we hustled. At first, we did everything ourselves, scrubbing toilets, mopping floors, and cleaning windows. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. We built a website, which, looking back, was terrible, posted ads on Craigslist, and handed out flyers everywhere. Slowly but surely, we started getting calls. Our first customer was a small office downtown. We cleaned it for $50, which was ridiculously low for the amount of work we did. But at the time, I was so excited about just having a paying client. For a while, things were good. We were getting more clients, and I started to learn the ins and outs of running a business. I realized that marketing was the key to success. We started offering discounts for referrals, and that really helped us grow. Rachel, on the other hand, started losing interest. She didn't like the work, and she wasn't as committed to growing the business. Eventually, she dropped out of the business altogether, leaving me to run it on my own. At first, I was scared. I had no idea how I was going to handle everything alone. But I didn't want to quit. I didn't want to let go of what I had built. So I kept going. I started hiring employees to help with the cleaning, and that was a whole new challenge. Managing people is tough, especially when you're young and still learning the ropes yourself. There were issues with reliability, turnover, and training. I had to deal with employees who didn't show up on time or who didn't clean properly. I had to learn how to be a leader, how to delegate, and how to make sure that everything ran smoothly. But things started to improve. I began focusing on building systems and processes for the business. I hired a manager to help with day-to-day operations, and that gave me the time to focus on growing the business. One of the key turning points was when I realized that I needed to treat this business like a real business, not just a side hustle. I invested in better equipment, hired a professional to redesign our website, and started focusing more on our branding. I also began networking with other business owners and learning from their experiences. A few years into the business, I hit a major turning point. The business was growing steadily, but I was still stuck in the day-to-day grind. I was working long hours, dealing with customer complaints, and constantly putting out fires. I realized that I wasn't really growing as an entrepreneur. I was just maintaining what I had built. That's when I decided to get serious about scaling the business. I took a step back, hired a business coach, and started learning about systems, marketing, and leadership on a much deeper level. With the help of my coach, I completely revamped our approach. We started focusing on high-end clients who were willing to pay more for premium service. We raised our prices, hired more experienced cleaners, and started targeting larger office buildings and commercial spaces. The results were incredible. Our revenue doubled within a year. We started getting referrals from big companies, and the business started running more smoothly as I delegated more and more tasks. But scaling a business brings new challenges. Once we reached a certain level, we started to encounter competition. New cleaning services were popping up all over town, and some of them were underpricing us to try and steal our clients. It became a battle for the market share, and I had to learn how to adapt. I realized that we needed to differentiate ourselves. So, we started offering more specialized services like green cleaning, which attracted a new segment of eco-conscious clients. As the years went on, I continued to grow the business. Eventually, I reached a point where I was able to step away from the day-to-day operations and focus on strategic planning. I sold the cleaning service to a larger company in the industry, and after the sale, I took some time off to reflect. It was a wild ride, full of ups and downs, but ultimately, it was the start of my entrepreneurial career. After selling the business, I started a new venture in tech, which is where I am today. I took all the lessons I had learned from the cleaning service, marketing, leadership, managing growth, and applied them to my new venture. Running the cleaning business taught me the importance of persistence, resilience, and the value of small wins. It wasn't always glamorous, but it gave me the foundation I needed to build bigger and better businesses. If I had to sum up everything I learned, it would be this: starting a business is hard, but if you stick with it, keep learning, and never give up, the rewards are worth it. The key to success isn't about having the perfect plan from the start. It's about being willing to fail, learn from your mistakes, and adapt. So, if you're thinking about starting your own business, just do it. You'll fail, but you'll also grow, and that's what matters in the end. I was always that kid with big dreams but little direction. My parents were working-class folks, always pushing the importance of education, stability, and getting a good job. But for me, the idea of working for someone else just never clicked. My heroes were entrepreneurs, people who carved their own path, made their own rules, and found ways to make a living on their own terms. In high school, I started a small side hustle, flipping sneakers. The hype around limited edition sneakers was growing, and I saw a chance. I'd wake up early to camp out for releases, then use platforms like eBay to flip them for a hefty profit. I'd spend my afternoons selling the shoes I didn't keep, and though it wasn't a full-blown business, it taught me the value of hustle, negotiation, and understanding trends. I made some decent money for a teenager, but I was far from thinking of myself as an entrepreneur just yet. Fast forward to college, I was studying business administration, still unsure of where I wanted to go. My parents were relieved when I picked a stable career path, even if I wasn't particularly passionate about it. I figured I'd figure things out along the way. But the turning point came during my junior year. I was stuck in a summer internship at a financial firm, and to put it mildly, I hated it. The work was dry, my manager was insufferable, and I felt like I was wasting my time. One day, during lunch, I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw a post from a company selling custom-made hats. They were basic designs, but the price tags were absurdly high, like $50 for a hat that cost maybe $10 to make. It hit me like a ton of bricks. If they could sell these things for so much, why couldn't I do the same? That afternoon, I started researching hat manufacturers. I learned about embroidery, the best fabrics, and the world of custom merchandise. The more I researched, the more I realized I could create something unique. The idea of starting my own brand, my own thing, lit a fire in me. I didn't have any savings, but I had enough credit to place a small order for a batch of hats. I went to my college's design lab, came up with a simple logo, and placed my first order with a manufacturer in China. That night, I barely slept. I was so excited about the potential of what I was about to do. When the hats arrived 2 months later, I thought I was ready. I took some photos with my phone, nothing fancy, just some quick shots. I posted them on Instagram, built a small website, and waited. Nothing happened. My friends and family showed some interest, but no one was really buying. I felt defeated, like maybe I had misread the whole entrepreneur thing. But I refused to quit. I looked at what others in the industry were doing and realized I wasn't standing out. My design was too generic, and my marketing was practically non-existent. I decided to double down on social media marketing. I reached out to influencers in my niche, offered them free hats in exchange for shoutouts, and started running small, targeted ads on Instagram and Facebook. Slowly, the wheels started turning. At first, it was just a couple of sales a week. I could barely cover the cost of the hats, let alone make a profit. But with each sale, I learned something new. I tweaked my marketing, made my product better, and refined my brand message. One day, I got an email from a local clothing store asking if I wanted to sell my hats in their shop. They had seen my Instagram and were impressed by my product. I couldn't believe it. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just a kid with a side hustle anymore. I was building something real. The store took my hats on consignment, and that was my big break. More stores started reaching out. I started to see sales grow, but it wasn't until I built an online community around my brand that everything exploded. I stopped just selling hats and started selling a lifestyle. I posted user-generated content, stories about how people were using my products, and even behind-the-scenes videos of how the hats were made. I worked tirelessly on Instagram, engaged with every customer, and created a brand voice that resonated with my audience. By my senior year of college, I was running a 6-figure business, and my brand was being sold in stores across the country. I dropped out of college a semester before graduation, a decision that made my parents furious, but I knew it was the right one for me. My friends were skeptical. They thought I was throwing away my degree for something risky and unstable. But I didn't care. I was doing what I loved, and I was finally building something that could become bigger than just me. The next few years were a blur of growth, failure, and constant learning. I faced challenges like supply chain issues, employee turnover, and the pressure of keeping up with trends. There were times when I thought about throwing in the towel, especially when sales slowed down or when my business's cash flow was tight. But I kept pushing, always looking for ways to innovate and improve. I knew that success didn't come easy, but one of the most important lessons I learned along the way was the importance of mindset. I wasn't always the smartest, the most talented, or the most experienced, but I was persistent. I was willing to learn, adapt, and keep going even when things felt impossible. I built my brand on the values of resilience, creativity, and hard work. Today, my business is no longer just a hat company. It's evolved into a full-fledged brand that sells apparel, accessories, and lifestyle products. We've grown from a tiny operation in my dorm room to a company with multiple employees, partnerships with major retailers, and a growing online presence. We've faced setbacks, like when we had to recall a batch of products due to a manufacturing error, but each setback only made us stronger. I still look back at that moment in my college dorm when I decided to take a leap into entrepreneurship. It wasn't the easiest path, and it definitely wasn't the most conventional one, but it was my path. And for anyone out there who feels like they're stuck in a dead-end job or uncertain about their future, just take that first step. You might stumble along the way, but you can build something amazing if you're willing to put in the work and stay committed. It's not going to be easy, but the rewards are worth it. I'll never forget that moment I made the decision to drop out of college. At the time, I was 22, juggling a part-time job as a barista while trying to figure out my plan for the future. I had always been a big fan of entrepreneurship, but I didn't have a clear path in mind. Every day was the same. Wake up, work, study, repeat. It wasn't the life I imagined when I first arrived at college. I grew up in a pretty humble background, where money was always tight. My parents were hardworking, but we never had much. They always told me that education was the key to a better life, but I didn't feel like that was true for me. I wasn't a terrible student, but I wasn't the kind of person who thrived in a structured classroom environment either. I felt like there had to be something more out there. I wasn't exactly sure where to start, but after a few months of soul-searching and spending way too much time watching YouTube videos about people who made it big online, I decided to drop out. I wanted to try something different. My parents didn't exactly approve, but they also knew how miserable I was. They asked me if I had a backup plan. I didn't. I didn't even know what I was doing half the time, but I just knew that I had to try. For a few months, I floundered. I tried a few online business ideas, affiliate marketing, dropshipping, blogging, but nothing seemed to click. It was a roller coaster of failed ideas and financial stress. My savings were dwindling, and I was getting to the point where I was thinking, maybe I should go back to college. But something kept me going. Maybe it was the idea that I'd rather fail trying than never try at all. The turning point came during one of my mini gym sessions. I had been working out for a while, but never took it seriously. I started researching supplements to help me improve my performance, but I found that the market was flooded with brands that all seemed to say the same thing. It was hard to find quality products that weren't loaded with sugar and artificial ingredients. I felt like there was a gap in the market for high-quality, all-natural supplements that were actually effective and affordable. That was the moment I saw an opportunity. I started researching the supplement industry, learning about ingredients, regulations, suppliers, everything I could get my hands on. I spent hours on Google and reading reviews, even connecting with people who had been in the industry for years. I wasn't just learning for the sake of it. I was looking for a way to create a product that filled the gap I had seen in the market. Now, here's where things started to get a little crazy. I had less than $500 left in my bank account, and I knew if I didn't make something happen soon, I would be stuck in a dead-end job, possibly even back in school, hating my life. So I started small. I connected with a few manufacturers who would produce small batches of custom supplement blends. I spent a few $100s on product development, packaging, and setting up a simple website. I didn't have a lot of money for advertising, so I relied on social media and word of mouth to get the ball rolling. The first couple of months were tough. Sales were slow, and I had to keep my day job to make ends meet. But I refused to quit. Every time I sold a bottle of supplements, I took that money and reinvested it into more products and better marketing. I learned everything I could about digital marketing, Facebook ads, Instagram influencers, SEO, and building an email list. Then, things started to snowball. Slowly, but surely, my brand started gaining traction. I reached out to fitness influencers and offered to send them free products in exchange for a review. Some said yes, some said no, but the ones who said yes helped bring in a lot of new customers. I was building a community around my brand, and people were starting to trust it. That was huge. By the time I had my first 1,000 customers, I was starting to realize that I had something special on my hands. I was still working odd jobs to pay the bills, but my business was growing. I quit my day job and went all in. The next few years were a whirlwind of late nights, long hours, and a lot of trial and error. I was constantly tweaking my products, my marketing strategies, and my business operations. I made a ton of mistakes, but I always learned from them and kept going. There were plenty of times when I thought about giving up. My friends would tell me to get a real job, and my parents were still skeptical. But something inside me told me that I was on the right track. I kept pushing, and eventually, my persistence paid off. Fast forward to today, and I run a 7-figure supplement company with a small but dedicated team. We've expanded our product line, optimized our supply chain, and developed a loyal customer base. I've been able to quit working for anyone else, and I'm able to invest in other projects that I'm passionate about. It wasn't easy, but every sacrifice, every sleepless night, and every mistake has led me to where I am now. Looking back, I don't regret a single moment of the journey. I've grown as an entrepreneur and as a person. I've learned that success isn't just about the destination, but about the resilience to keep going when things get tough. And most importantly, I've learned that sometimes the best opportunities come when you least expect them, when you take a risk, even when you have no idea what will happen. If there's one thing I want to tell anyone who's thinking about starting their own business, it's this: don't wait for the perfect moment or the perfect idea. Just start. You'll learn as you go, and your mistakes will teach you more than you can imagine. If you have a vision and are willing to work for it, you can make it happen. So, if you're out there, stuck in a job you hate, or wondering if you should take the leap and start something of your own, my advice is simple: go for it. It won't be easy, but it'll be worth it. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I'm an entrepreneur who started with nothing, and somehow, now I'm living my dream. I want to share my journey, which is full of challenges, risks, and lessons learned the hard way. It's been a crazy ride, but looking back, I'm so proud of how far I've come. I grew up in a small town in the middle of nowhere. My family wasn't poor, but we weren't exactly rolling in cash either. My parents were hardworking folks, but they weren't entrepreneurs. My dad was a mechanic, and my mom worked as a cashier. I watched them work tirelessly every day, but even though they provided for us, I saw how tired they were and how little time they had for themselves. They always said, "We work for you so you can have a better life." But it made me think, what if there was a way to live a life where I didn't have to trade my time for money? At the age of 16, I became obsessed with business and entrepreneurship. While my friends were out partying or playing sports, I was reading books about the greats: Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Richard Branson. I was fascinated by how these people turned ideas into empires. The idea of building something from scratch, something that could change the world, ignited a fire inside me. But I had no idea how to start. My family didn't know much about business, and there wasn't much advice or support available. So, I decided to start small. I began by dabbling in side hustles during high school. My first attempt was selling homemade t-shirts. I would design simple, funny, or edgy shirts and sell them to classmates. I even built a small online store, but it was a disaster. I didn't know how to market. I didn't have a real business model, and I was completely overwhelmed by the logistics of managing orders. I made some money, but I also lost a lot of time and energy. But rather than feeling defeated, I took it as a learning experience. The failure taught me one of the most important lessons. Business is a long game, and you have to be prepared to take hits, adjust, and keep moving forward. After high school, I decided to go to college, though it wasn't really for the education. I wasn't sure if I needed a degree to become successful, but I thought it might help me build a network, and I hoped I would learn a few things that could benefit my entrepreneurial ambitions. During my second year, I got the idea to start a mobile app. It was a simple concept, a platform where people could book personal trainers or fitness classes. I'd noticed how crowded the gym schedules were and thought that if people could schedule training times more easily, it would improve their experience. At that point, I knew nothing about coding, design, or app development, so I hired a freelance developer from Upwork to help build it. I was working with a limited budget, but I was optimistic. I got a group of friends together to create content for the platform, and I did all the marketing myself. The launch was a disaster. The app was buggy, the design was horrible, and we didn't attract enough users to cover the expenses of the freelancers. I wanted to quit, but again, I reminded myself that failure was part of the process. So, I took a step back, analyzed where we went wrong, and learned another lesson. I needed to understand the product inside out if I was going to succeed. I couldn't just rely on others to build it for me. Over the next 6 months, I taught myself basic coding, user experience design, and digital marketing. I found a group of like-minded people to collaborate with, and we started building a new version of the app, this time from scratch. While working on this project, I was juggling part-time jobs to fund the business, and I was living off ramen noodles and energy drinks. I had no social life, no sleep, and no time for anything else. But I couldn't give up. Every spare moment was spent learning and improving. Slowly, we started to see traction. Users were signing up. Fitness trainers were joining the platform. It wasn't a huge success yet, but the momentum was there, and it felt like we were on the verge of something big. Then, something unexpected happened. A large competitor in the fitness app space reached out to me with an acquisition offer. They had been watching us grow and were interested in buying the company. At first, I was thrilled. After all, I had been working nonstop for years, and now there was an opportunity to cash out. But when I sat down and thought about it, I realized something important. I wasn't ready to sell. This was my dream. This was my chance to build something that mattered. I turned down the offer and decided to keep pushing. It was one of the hardest decisions of my life, but it also felt empowering. I was no longer just chasing money, I was chasing a vision. Over the next 2 years, I focused on improving the app and expanding its reach. We launched new features, improved customer service, and developed strategic partnerships with fitness brands. Eventually, we started getting noticed by investors. One day, a venture capital firm reached out to us with an offer. They believed in our vision and offered to fund the company at a valuation I could have only dreamed of. This time, I was ready. With the funding, we were able to scale the business, hire more employees, and grow exponentially. The hardest part of scaling, though, was letting go of some of the control. I had always been a solo operator, but now I had to trust others with parts of the business that I had previously managed myself. It was terrifying, but it was necessary for growth. Fast forward to today, and I'm proud to say that the company is thriving. We've expanded internationally, and we're now one of the leading fitness apps in the market. I've achieved financial success, but more than that, I've built a team of incredible people who share my vision and passion. I can't believe how far we've come from that initial, messy start. Looking back on my journey, the biggest lesson I've learned is that entrepreneurship isn't a straight line. It's full of twists, turns, and setbacks. You have to be relentless, but also willing to adapt. The road is tough, but with persistence, anything is possible. If I had to give one piece of advice to anyone starting out, it would be this: don't be afraid to fail. The best entrepreneurs are the ones who fail the most, because they learn the most. Failure is just a stepping stone to success, and every setback is an opportunity to grow. There's no magic formula for success, but if you're willing to put in the work, take risks, and stay focused on your vision, you can build something incredible. I'm living proof of that. I was 24 when I first thought about starting my own business. It seemed like an impossible dream, one of those ideas you daydream about when you're stuck in a dead-end job. At the time, I was working at a mid-tier marketing agency, helping brands with their social media strategies. I hated it. Every day felt the same. My boss was a micromanager, and my colleagues were more focused on office gossip than getting anything done. I couldn't help but feel that I was wasting my time. I wanted to do something on my own, something that had the potential to change my life. I spent nights brainstorming ideas. I tried to think of what I was passionate about, what skills I had, and what people needed. It took me weeks, but I finally had an idea. I wanted to build a company focused on sustainable fashion. I had been following eco-conscious brands for a while, and I noticed a gap in the market for affordable, stylish clothing made from sustainable materials. It seemed like there was a growing demand for eco-friendly options, but most brands either sold super expensive clothes or didn't prioritize sustainability enough. I figured if I could find a way to combine style, affordability, and sustainability, I might be onto something big. I was terrified. The idea of leaving a stable job and trying to start something from scratch was daunting. I had no experience in the fashion industry and no connections, but I was determined. I spent weeks researching, reaching out to suppliers, learning about sustainable fabrics, and studying business models. I was working 9 to 5, but every evening and weekend, I was deep into this project. I taught myself how to build a basic website, and I started looking into manufacturing options. There were so many roadblocks. Many manufacturers either didn't take small orders seriously or required a massive upfront investment that I couldn't afford. After a couple of months of digging around, I found a small ethical factory overseas that agreed to work with me on a pilot collection. They weren't as cheap as the traditional fast fashion factories, but they used organic cotton and recycled materials, and their workers were paid fairly. It was exactly what I wanted. I didn't have the capital to produce a large collection, so I decided to start small, just a handful of t-shirts, hoodies, and a few accessories. I poured all the savings I had into this first batch. The next hurdle was marketing. I had no budget for ads, and no one knew who I was. So I decided to rely on social media and word of mouth. I set up Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest accounts for the brand, and I started posting daily. I focused on educating people about sustainable fashion, sharing the story of how the brand was built, and showing the behind-the-scenes process of creating the products. It wasn't glamorous, but it was authentic. I didn't have any fancy photo shoots or influencers promoting my products, just me, my phone, and a lot of late-night work. The first month, I sold a total of 3 items. Not exactly a huge success, but I wasn't discouraged. I kept pushing, kept posting, kept learning. I reached out to eco-friendly influencers who had small but engaged followings and offered them free products in exchange for honest reviews. Slowly but surely, the brand started gaining traction. People were interested in the story behind the clothes, and they liked the idea of supporting a small business that was trying to make a positive impact. By month 6, I was starting to see some real growth. I sold out of my initial stock, and I was able to reinvest the profits into more inventory. I decided to hire a part-time assistant to help with customer service and logistics, as I was overwhelmed with the workload. As the brand grew, so did my understanding of what worked and what didn't. I realized that focusing on quality, transparency, and community was key. I made sure to communicate every step of the process to my customers, from the sourcing of materials to the production timeline. I wanted them to feel like they were part of the journey. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were plenty of times when I wanted to give up. I hit roadblocks with suppliers, faced delays in production, and struggled to meet the demand for my products. There were weeks when I barely made enough to cover expenses, and I wondered if I had made a huge mistake. I still remember the time I was staring at a spreadsheet late one night, wondering how I was going to pay the bills. I had an overwhelming amount of self-doubt, but I kept going because I didn't want to give up on something I had worked so hard for. The turning point came when I decided to launch a new product line, a collection of eco-friendly backpacks and totes. This new line was the product I had always wanted to create, but I had been too afraid to take the leap. The backpacks were simple, yet stylish, and made from recycled materials like ocean plastic and repurposed fabric. The launch was a huge success. It sold out within days. People loved the concept, and the media took notice. I started getting featured on eco-conscious blogs and even local news outlets. By the end of year 1, I had made enough money to quit my full-time job. It felt surreal. I had gone from working at a soul-crushing marketing agency to being the CEO of my own company. The first year was full of challenges, but it was also full of lessons. I learned how to manage a team, how to scale a business, and how to market without a big budget. Most importantly, I learned to trust myself, even when things seemed impossible. Today, my business is still growing, and we've expanded our product range to include everything from jackets to shoes. We've built a loyal customer base who believes in our mission and values. I'm no longer the underdog. I'm an established entrepreneur who has created a brand that not only stands for sustainability but also empowers others to make more conscious choices. We've worked with environmental organizations, and we've even started offering scholarships to students studying sustainability. It's incredible to think how far we've come from those early days of posting photos on Instagram. Looking back, I realized that the key to my success wasn't about having the perfect plan or being in the right place at the right time. It was about persistence and passion. There were countless obstacles along the way, but I never gave up. If you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple. Start small, stay focused, and don't be afraid to fail. Every setback is an opportunity to learn. Trust in yourself and know that the journey will be tough, but it will be worth it. Entrepreneurship isn't for the faint of heart, but if you've got the fire in you, you can make it happen. It's a long road, but the view from the top is worth every struggle. So, I've been an entrepreneur for the past 10 years, and like most people, my journey has been full of ups, downs, and a whole lot of learning the hard way. I wanted to share my story because, honestly, it might help someone out there who's considering starting a business but is hesitant due to the fear of failure. I'm no expert, but I've learned a lot and want to pass on some of the lessons. It all started back in college. I was always the guy who wanted to make money on the side, mostly because I hated the idea of being broke. I came from a middle-class family, and while we didn't struggle, we didn't have much extra either. One summer, I got a job at a retail store, which I absolutely hated. The pay was bad, the work was mind-numbing, and the hours were long. I didn't even get to enjoy the summer break because of it. So, I started to think, how can I make money without being stuck in a job like this? I had a knack for graphic design, so I started creating logos and websites for local businesses. The pay wasn't much, but I was gaining experience and building a portfolio. This was back in 2011, when small businesses were just starting to realize the importance of having an online presence. My work was pretty decent, but nothing special. Still, I was eager, and that drive paid off. Eventually, I started getting referrals from friends, and what started as a small side hustle soon became a full-time gig. I remember feeling so proud of myself when I made my first $1,000 in a month. It didn't seem like much now, but back then it felt like I had unlocked the secret to financial freedom. I was able to quit my retail job and focus on my freelance work. However, this is where things took a turn for the worse. The first mistake I made was thinking I had it all figured out. I didn't have a business plan or a solid understanding of how to run a company. I just took whatever clients came my way. Sure, I was making money, but I wasn't being strategic about it. I didn't set up a proper accounting system, didn't have contracts in place for clients, and worst of all, I didn't save for taxes. I just assumed everything would work itself out. Spoiler, it didn't. By the end of my first year in business, I had a few clients who had paid me well, but I also had a mountain of debt from mismanaging my finances. To make matters worse, one of my clients had refused to pay for a project after I delivered the work. I didn't have a contract, so legally there was nothing I could do. I learned a hard lesson. Always have a contract. Always. This period was rough. I remember feeling like I was on the verge of giving up. I even considered going back to a regular job, but something inside me kept pushing me forward. I realized that if I wanted to succeed, I needed to get serious. I spent the next few months learning everything I could about business, finance, marketing, client management, and the legal side of things. I also started saving money because I knew I couldn't survive another year like the last one. In year 2, I made a strategic pivot. I decided to niche down and focus on creating websites specifically for local restaurants. Why restaurants? Because I had a passion for food and had done some work with a few local spots. Plus, I realized that many of them didn't have a good online presence. I'd go to these places and see that they didn't even have a website or their website was outdated, which gave me the idea that this could be a market I could tap into. At first, I was nervous. I had to cold call a bunch of restaurant owners, many of whom didn't even understand why they needed a website. But I kept pushing. Slowly, one by one, I got some clients. By the end of year 2, I had a portfolio of restaurant websites, and I was starting to get a steady stream of referrals. I wasn't rich, but I was able to pay my bills, put some money into savings, and reinvest in my business. Then came the third year, and this is where things started to get interesting. In year 3, I realized that simply building websites wasn't enough. The businesses I worked with were asking me for more. They wanted to understand how they could attract more customers, how they could increase sales, and how they could use social media to market themselves. I had a choice to make. I could either stick to what I knew and continue building websites, or I could diversify and offer digital marketing services as well. I chose to diversify, and that's when things really took off. I started offering SEO, social media marketing, and paid ads as part of my services. At first, it was tough. I didn't have experience in these areas, so I spent nights studying and experimenting with Google Ads, Facebook campaigns, and Instagram marketing. I failed a lot, but I learned from my mistakes and adjusted my approach. By the end of year 4, I had a full-fledged digital marketing agency. I had a team of 3 people working with me, 2 freelancers and an intern. We were doing well, and I started seeing the potential to scale. I realized that I could grow this business even further if I took a more hands-off approach and focused on building systems and processes that would allow us to handle more clients. And that's exactly what I did. I hired more people, refined our systems, and improved our marketing efforts. We were able to streamline client onboarding, create templates for proposals, and develop a repeatable process for every service we offered. The business was running more smoothly, and I was making money without having to do everything myself. However, like most entrepreneurs, I hit a plateau. It took me a long time to realize that I was stuck because I had reached a point where I was working in the business, not on the business. I had to learn to delegate, trust my team, and focus on high-level strategies. I had to stop trying to do everything and instead empower my team to take ownership of their areas. Fast forward to now, 10 years later, and I've grown the business from a one-man operation into a full-fledged digital agency with 20 employees. We have clients across various industries, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to work remotely, traveling, and spending time with my family. I've learned a lot along the way, and though there's always room for growth, I've come a long way from those days of struggling to get clients and managing debt. Looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. All the mistakes, the sleepless nights, the stress, it was all part of the journey. And the one thing I've learned above all else is this: success isn't about avoiding failure. It's about learning from it and getting up again when things go wrong. If you're thinking about starting your own business, just know that the road is tough, but the rewards are worth it if you keep pushing forward. I'm living proof of that. So, if you're reading this and you're on the fence about whether or not to take the leap into entrepreneurship, my advice is, just do it. You'll never feel ready, but you'll figure it out as you go. It's going to be hard, but that's part of what makes it worth it. Good luck to you all, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to help. I started my entrepreneurial journey with absolutely no plan. I didn't have some grand vision, a perfect product idea, or a lot of startup capital. In fact, I had just graduated from college, armed with a marketing degree that I honestly didn't know how to use. But I had a burning desire to build something for myself, something that wasn't about working for someone else. It all began with a simple frustration that turned into a huge opportunity. After college, I moved back home, like a lot of people do. My parents were supportive, but didn't really know what to do with me, and I had no idea what to do with myself. I started working for a local retail business, just doing sales and marketing, but something about the corporate grind didn't sit well with me. The rigid hours, the glass ceiling, the lack of flexibility, it all felt like a dead end. Then, one night, I was at a party and overheard a conversation between a couple of friends. One was complaining about how expensive and untrustworthy the cleaning services were in our area. Apparently, every cleaning company she hired left something to be desired. Either they were too expensive, the cleaning wasn't thorough, or they'd skip over crucial tasks. Her frustration sparked something in me. What if I could offer a cleaning service that was affordable, trustworthy, and high quality? What if I could cut out the middleman and provide a service where customers knew they were getting value for their money? I didn't know much about cleaning, honestly, but I did know how to market a product. I decided to take a leap. I bought a few basic cleaning supplies, printed some flyers, and started calling local businesses. I didn't have an official website or a fancy business card. I didn't even have a business name yet. But I started going door to door, talking to small businesses and residential complexes. I was nervous, but I told myself that I had nothing to lose. A lot of people turned me away. Some of them looked at me like I was crazy, but I didn't let that stop me. I kept pushing, calling people, showing up at their offices, and asking for a shot. Slowly, I began to get clients. It was small at first, just a couple of office buildings, a few apartments. But the jobs I took on, I did with an intensity that I hadn't expected. I cleaned every corner of those spaces, and I made sure that the customers were always happy. After a couple of months, I had a steady stream of clients. I used the little money I was making to reinvest into the business. I bought better equipment, upgraded my cleaning supplies, and invested in branding. I spent sleepless nights researching how to make my service better, how to get more clients, how to improve the quality of my work. It was exhausting. But the more I invested, the better the results. A couple of things happened that gave me the momentum I needed. First, I realized that marketing was everything. I started building a brand, something people could trust. I also got into digital marketing, running Facebook and Google ads to get my name out there. The more I reached out, the more customers came in. My services expanded from residential cleaning to office cleaning, and eventually, I began offering deep cleaning, carpet cleaning, and specialized services. At the same time, I was slowly learning the ropes of managing a business. I hired a small team of cleaners, but I was still hands-on, working alongside them to make sure everything was perfect. I knew that if I didn't do it right, I would lose the trust of my clients. But things were going well. I managed to secure some bigger clients, and my small operation was growing. And then, the unthinkable happened. I got an offer from a competitor, one of the big players in the cleaning industry. They wanted to buy my business. At first, I was flattered. It was an incredible offer, millions of dollars, enough to change my life forever. But then, I realized something. This business was my baby. I had poured my soul into it, and to sell it now would feel like giving up. Sure, the money would have been life-changing, but I wasn't ready to walk away. Instead of selling, I decided to double down. I expanded my team, improved the client experience, and scaled my operations. I started thinking big, not just about residential cleaning, but also expanding to other cities. I invested heavily in systems and processes to streamline the business. I learned how to delegate, how to manage teams, and how to keep growing. One of the most difficult challenges I faced was managing cash flow. I didn't have a ton of money at the start, so I had to juggle client payments, overhead costs, and employee salaries. There were months when I didn't know how I was going to pay the bills. But every time things seemed to get rough, I found a way to push through, whether it was by cutting back on non-essentials or negotiating better terms with suppliers. Over the next few years, the business grew faster than I ever imagined. I expanded into new cities and began offering corporate cleaning contracts. My brand became a symbol of reliability and quality. But with growth came new challenges, managing a bigger team, keeping up with customer expectations, dealing with taxes, insurance, and legal issues. There were days when I felt like I was drowning in paperwork and stress. I had to learn how to handle it all without burning out. Through it all, I stuck to one principle: delivering a top-quality service. I knew that as long as I kept my customers happy, they would keep coming back. Over time, I began offering more specialized services, like eco-friendly cleaning and post-construction cleanups. I also expanded into other related businesses, like offering janitorial supplies to other cleaning companies. In the end, my business became a success beyond anything I had imagined when I was just a kid working retail after college. I didn't make millions overnight, but I built something that was my own, something that provided jobs for people in my community and made a real difference. It wasn't easy. There were plenty of times when I wanted to quit, when I felt like I was in over my head. But looking back, I'm glad I stuck with it. It wasn't just about money, it was about creating something from scratch and proving to myself that I could do it. Now, years later, I've sold the company to a larger corporation, but I still have the satisfaction of knowing that my business changed people's lives, mine, and the lives of everyone who worked with me. So, to anyone out there thinking about starting their own business, if you're waiting for the perfect idea or the perfect time, stop. You don't need a perfect plan. Just start. Work hard, be patient, and keep improving. Don't be afraid to fail. It's just part of the journey. And most importantly, always keep your eyes on your goal. You might not know where you're going at first, but if you keep moving forward, you'll eventually get there. I always thought entrepreneurship was a clean, glamorous journey. The stories we see on TV, people like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, paint this beautiful image of success that feels inevitable once you've got the right idea, the right product, and the right timing. I was about to find out how far from reality that really was. My name is Ben, and about 5 years ago, I made the jump into entrepreneurship with what I thought was going to be a sure thing. I had worked as a software developer for 5 years, getting pretty comfortable with a decent salary, but there was always this itch to build something bigger, something that was truly mine. The idea came to me one day while chatting with a few friends over beers. We were all techies, and after a few rounds, the conversation shifted to the pain points we'd all felt as developers. One of my friends mentioned how difficult it was to manage the constant flow of code updates, revisions, and collaboration across different teams. Everyone had a different tool they were using, and nobody seemed to be on the same page. It was a nightmare. That's when it hit me: what if I could build a platform that solved this problem? A unified collaboration tool that would streamline communication, track revisions, and keep everyone in sync. Something like Google Docs for code, but on steroids. I spent the next few days obsessing over the idea, researching the market, and planning out what it would take to bring it to life. I was confident I could pull it off. After all, I was a developer. I knew code, I knew the pain points, and I had the technical skills. So, I quit my job and set out to build the product. At first, things went well. I found a couple of co-founders, both of whom were passionate about the problem we were solving. One was a UI/UX designer, and the other was a marketing expert. We rented a tiny office space in the city, gathered around a single table, and started building. There was a lot of energy in the air. Every day felt like we were doing something important. The excitement was contagious. I could see the vision, and it seemed so close to becoming reality. We started developing a minimum viable product, MVP, and preparing for our first demo. But then, reality hit. We were building a complex product. While the idea sounded simple enough, create a platform that would manage code revisions, track issues, and facilitate team collaboration, the technical challenges were enormous. We spent weeks on end refining our database structure, testing different ways to integrate with other development tools, and figuring out how to make everything as smooth and user-friendly as possible. We were in the weeds. And yet, we weren't making any money. As weeks turned into months, the pressure started to mount. We had sunk a fair amount of our savings into the project, and the idea of funding was still a distant dream. We couldn't afford to hire more developers, and with only a few of us working full-time, progress was slower than we had hoped. Even though I had a technical background, this was a whole new world. I had underestimated the complexity of product development, and worse, I had no real business acumen. I didn't know how to scale, how to reach customers, or how to market my product. It was becoming clear that I was in over my head. To make matters worse, we started running out of cash. I had initially thought we could bootstrap our way to success, but reality set in. The product needed more work, and we needed more money. We looked into venture capital, but we were too early. No one wanted to invest in a product that wasn't even close to market ready. So we did what any fledgling startup does in desperation: we pivoted. The first pivot was simple. Instead of focusing on the entire team collaboration suite, we narrowed down the features to just a few core functionalities. We figured if we could launch with something simple but useful, we could start generating revenue and build from there. We hoped it would be enough to attract users and get some early traction. But then came the second pivot. As we continued to develop the product, we realized that there was a massive gap between what we had built and what people actually needed. We were still focused on the tech side of things, focusing on features we thought developers would love. But we were missing the bigger picture: customer feedback. In hindsight, it was obvious, but at the time, we were too caught up in our own vision to really understand what the market wanted. The third pivot was a complete change in direction. We completely revamped the platform to focus on a different user base, smaller businesses instead of large development teams. This new direction felt right at first, but it was hard to shed the baggage of all the past failures. We were running on fumes, both financially and emotionally. I began to question whether this whole thing was a mistake. Then, just as we were about to pull the plug on everything, a breakthrough came. A small business reached out to us, intrigued by the simplicity of our new product. They asked for a custom feature, which, in hindsight, was a terrible idea because we didn't have the resources to build something customized for a single customer. But we were desperate, so we took on the challenge. We spent the next month working night and day to deliver this feature. And when we finally did, something incredible happened. The customer loved it. They shared the platform with other businesses in their industry, and before we knew it, we had a small but growing user base. We went from almost nothing to something. The momentum felt amazing. We were finally getting validation for all the hard work we had put in. Over the next year, things slowly started to improve. We added more features, listened closely to user feedback, and continuously iterated on the product. We brought in more customers and began charging for premium features. The money was still tight, but we were making enough to keep going. We even got a small angel investment that allowed us to expand the team and bring in some much-needed expertise. Today, our company is still small, but we're profitable. We've built a dedicated customer base, and the product is continuously evolving. Looking back, it's easy to focus on the successes, but what people don't tell you is that the journey to get here was a grind. There were moments when I wanted to quit, when I thought I had made a huge mistake. But I learned so much about persistence, adaptability, and, most importantly, about listening to your customers. The journey has been far from glamorous, and it definitely hasn't been as easy as the success stories make it seem. But I'm glad I stuck with it. I've learned that entrepreneurship isn't about just having the right idea. It's about being able to adapt, learn from failure, and keep going when the going gets tough. Looking back, I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm a 28-year-old entrepreneur, and I want to share how I went from living paycheck to paycheck, working dead-end jobs, and barely scraping by, to building a six-figure online business in the span of 2 years. This isn't a get-rich-quick story. There were a lot of sleepless nights, failed attempts, and moments where I questioned whether I was just wasting my time. But if you're willing to put in the effort, adapt, and stay persistent, you can make it too. Growing up, I didn't have the best circumstances. My parents worked hard to make ends meet, but money was always tight. I remember getting made fun of at school for wearing old clothes and not having the latest gadgets. It wasn't that I didn't have dreams of a better life, but growing up in a small town where everyone knew each other's business, it felt like opportunities were limited. I didn't have any role models in business or even anyone who had made it. College didn't happen for me because we couldn't afford it, so I went straight into the workforce after high school. I took up a job at a local retail store, and eventually, I worked my way up to a management position. I thought I had it made. But one thing was constant in my life: boredom. I felt trapped in this cycle of working for someone else, earning just enough to pay the bills, and getting no closer to what I imagined my life could be. I knew there had to be more out there, but I didn't know where to start. It all started when I stumbled upon an online forum, Reddit, actually, about making money online. I was skeptical at first. I had heard all the stories about get-rich-quick schemes, scams, and guru entrepreneurs. But there was something about the posts that felt real. They talked about e-commerce, digital marketing, dropshipping, and affiliate marketing. I had no idea what any of those terms meant, but I was curious. After a couple of weeks of late-night reading, I realized I had been living in a bubble, thinking that my only option for making money was working a traditional job. I felt a fire inside me. I couldn't ignore it. The idea of building something on my own was intoxicating, even though I had no clue what I was doing. I didn't have a lot of money saved up, so I started small. I took a $200 loan from a friend, which I still feel bad about, but I paid it back within 3 months, and I decided to give dropshipping a shot. For those who aren't familiar, dropshipping is where you set up an online store, sell products from a supplier, and the supplier ships the product directly to the customer. You never handle the product yourself. I spent the next few weeks setting up my store. I didn't know anything about website design, SEO, or digital marketing. I just knew I needed a website. So, I bought a theme, slapped some products on there, and called it a day. I thought that just having the store would be enough to make sales. I was wrong. For the first 2 months, my store barely made any sales. I spent hours scrolling through YouTube, reading articles, and trying to figure out what I was doing wrong. The common advice I saw was advertise on Facebook and run ads. But I was nervous about spending money on ads. My $200 loan was all I had, and if I lost that, I would be back to square one. Still, I decided to take the plunge. I ran my first Facebook ad campaign with a budget of $5 per day. The ad was for a small kitchen gadget I thought would be a hit. To my surprise, I started getting clicks. It wasn't many, but it was something. I slowly started tweaking my ad copy, experimenting with different audiences, and refining my targeting. Over time, the sales trickled in. By the end of the 3rd month, I had made around $3,000 in revenue. After subtracting the cost of ads, product costs, and shipping fees, I made a profit of around $400. It wasn't life-changing, but it was a start. And more importantly, I had proven to myself that this could work. I kept reinvesting the profits back into the business, learning as I went. I took more courses on e-commerce, marketing, and sales. I learned how to optimize my ads, create better product listings, and improve the user experience on my website. By the end of the 6th month, I was consistently making $200 to $3,000 in profit each month. But things really started to take off when I shifted my focus from dropshipping to creating my own products. I found a supplier in China who could manufacture a unique kitchen gadget that I believed had real potential. I didn't want to just sell something that was already available. I wanted to create a brand. So, I invested $500 of my savings into getting the product manufactured, creating a brand around it, and building a new online store. This time, I took a more hands-on approach with my branding. I hired a designer to create a professional logo and branding kit, and I spent a lot of time perfecting the product page. I wanted it to feel like a premium product, something people would be excited to buy. It worked. Within the first month of launching my branded product, I made $7,000 in sales. I felt like I was on top of the world. By the end of the first year, my business was bringing in about $15,000 a month in revenue. I had quit my retail job and was working full-time on my business. I hired a small team to help with customer service and marketing, and I continued to reinvest every penny back into the business. I was no longer just scraping by. I had the freedom to do what I loved, and I was in control of my destiny. But the road wasn't without its bumps. There were still moments of doubt. I had several failed ad campaigns, products that didn't sell, and times when I had to pivot my strategy. I even dealt with the stress of managing a team for the first time. There were weeks where I felt like everything was going to fall apart, but I pushed through it. Today, my business is doing 6 figures a year. It's still growing, and I'm still learning every day. I have systems in place for everything, from marketing to fulfillment, and I'm constantly experimenting with new strategies to scale further. What started as a side hustle has turned into a thriving online business that provides for me and my family. The best part? I wake up every day excited to work on something I'm passionate about. I'm no longer living paycheck to paycheck. I'm not rich, but I have financial freedom. I've learned so much about business, marketing, and perseverance, and I'm proof that anyone can succeed if they're willing to put in the effort. To anyone reading this who feels stuck or unsure where to start, my advice is simple. Start small, stay persistent, and don't be afraid to fail. You'll face challenges, but every failure is just a lesson that gets you closer to success. Believe in yourself, keep learning, and never give up. If I can do it, so can you. My entrepreneurial journey started in a way that no one would have predicted. I grew up in a modest neighborhood, in a small town that barely had a few coffee shops, let alone any tech hubs or startup incubators. My family wasn't wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, and for most of my life, I was surrounded by people who worked traditional jobs that required a 9 to 5 commitment, and where the idea of starting your own business was considered a risky pipe dream. But from a young age, I was always the one asking, why not? Why not challenge the status quo? Why not see if I could change my future? I never thought of myself as particularly special, but what I did have was an unrelenting curiosity. From the time I was a kid, I was always tinkering with things, be it electronics, the family computer, or just random stuff I found around the house. I had a knack for taking things apart, figuring out how they worked, and then, usually, managing to put them back together. It wasn't the most glamorous of skills, but it was mine, and over time, I came to realize that my real passion was in creating and improving things. Fast forward to college, and I was still not entirely sure what I wanted to do with my life. My first 2 years were spent exploring different fields, from engineering to business, but I still didn't feel like I had found my calling. Everything changed, however, during a summer internship at a tech startup. It wasn't the work itself that grabbed me, but the culture. I saw firsthand how a small, driven team could turn an idea into a product that changed lives. I saw entrepreneurs solving real problems and not just chasing profits. I wanted to be part of that world. I wanted to create something meaningful. But there was one big problem. I had no idea how to actually get started. I didn't have a fancy network or any real capital to my name, and I definitely didn't come from a family of entrepreneurs. My first step was to learn everything I could about business, tech, and startups. I spent every spare moment reading books, watching webinars, listening to podcasts, anything I could do to understand how businesses were born and what it took to scale them. Slowly, I began to build the foundation for what would eventually become my own company. By the time I graduated, I had a few ideas in mind, but the reality of starting a business was much tougher than I had imagined. I had no money, no network, and frankly, I wasn't entirely sure I had the skills to make it happen. But I couldn't shake the idea of doing something on my own. I remember one night, after a particularly frustrating week of job hunting and failed attempts at raising capital, I sat down at my kitchen table with a pen and paper, and I wrote a list. The list was simple. What could I offer that was unique? What problem could I solve? And most importantly, how could I make this work without needing millions of dollars to start? That night, the idea clicked. It wasn't about creating something completely new. It was about improving an existing idea and doing it in a way that no one else had thought of. I realized there was a gap in the market for a better, more affordable service in the tech sector. My solution was simple: a subscription-based platform that provided small businesses with affordable, high-quality tech support, and digital tools that would allow them to compete with larger companies. But even though the idea seemed solid, the road to success was filled with bumps. I still had no money to speak of, so I had to bootstrap everything. I started by working out of my apartment, using whatever savings I had left from my internship to purchase the basic equipment and software I needed. I was essentially living on ramen noodles and caffeine for the next few months, but I didn't care. I had a mission. I'll be honest, the first few months were rough. I spent a lot of time on the phone with potential customers, cold emailing businesses, and trying to drum up interest in my service. For every 10 people I reached out to, only one would respond, and out of those, maybe half would actually sign up. I remember feeling like I was constantly running on fumes, juggling a million things at once. But I stuck with it. I knew the only way to fail was to quit. After 6 months of hustle, things started to click. I had a handful of loyal customers, and I was beginning to see some positive feedback. My platform was helping small businesses streamline their operations, and word of mouth was starting to take off. I took a risk and reinvested every penny I made back into the business, expanding the team and improving the service. Then came the turning point. A well-known investor reached out to me after hearing about my company through a mutual connection. At first, I thought it was a joke. But after a few rounds of meetings, I realized this was my chance to scale the business. The investor liked what I had built and saw potential for rapid growth. They offered me seed funding in exchange for equity, and after a lot of deliberation, I took the plunge. The funding allowed me to hire more talent, improve the platform's infrastructure, and even expand into new markets. But as any entrepreneur knows, the problems don't magically disappear once you secure funding. In fact, it was the beginning of a whole new set of challenges. Scaling meant making tough decisions, firing people who weren't a good fit, dealing with growing pains, and managing a team that was expanding faster than I could keep up with. As the company grew, I found myself at a crossroads. I was no longer the scrappy solo founder, working late nights in a tiny apartment. I was leading a company with employees, clients, and investors, and that came with its own set of pressures. I had to learn to delegate, trust my team, and let go of the fear of making mistakes. I had to realize that failure was part of the process, and that every mistake was an opportunity to grow. Now, years later, my company is a success story that I could have only dreamed about back when I was sitting at my kitchen table with that list of ideas. We've expanded globally, helped thousands of businesses, and even got acquired by a larger firm. I've made mistakes, learned countless lessons, and faced numerous setbacks along the way, but looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. Starting a business isn't easy. It's not glamorous. It's filled with late nights, setbacks, and moments when you want to quit. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. The only way to succeed is to keep going, no matter how tough it gets. I can't tell you that every decision I made was the right one. I can't promise that it'll be smooth sailing for anyone thinking of starting their own business. But I can tell you that if you have the passion, the resilience, and the willingness to learn, there's no limit to what you can achieve. Entrepreneurship is a journey, not a destination, and the best part is, there's always something new to discover along the way. This is the story of how I went from barely scraping by to building a successful business. It's not a tale of instant success, nor one of wild business ventures that made me rich overnight. It's a story of mistakes, perseverance, and a bit of luck, just like most entrepreneurial journeys. I was in my mid-20s when I first decided to start a business. I had no experience running anything, let alone a company. All I knew was that I was tired of working dead-end jobs with no room for growth. I had a job at a small tech support company, and while it paid the bills, I felt like I was going nowhere. My boss was a nice guy, but the company itself had no clear vision, no ambition, and no strategy for growth. I wanted something more. I had this vague idea of what I wanted to do, something in tech, something that would solve a problem. I had always been fascinated by software, especially the way it could automate processes and make life easier. It wasn't long before I zeroed in on the idea of building a platform for small businesses to manage their customer interactions more effectively. I had seen firsthand how inefficient a lot of small companies were at handling customer relationships, and I knew there was an opportunity there. I had no idea how to build software, but I had a burning passion for the idea. So, I started learning. I spent nights after work going through online courses, reading blog posts, watching YouTube videos, and even picking up a few books. Slowly but surely, I started to piece together the basic knowledge I needed. It wasn't pretty at first. My first attempts at writing code were clunky and full of mistakes, but I didn't let that stop me. I remember spending weeks trying to figure out how to integrate a simple database into my app. It felt like I was hitting my head against a wall, but I just kept going. The first version of the software was barely usable. It had bugs, the UI was clunky, and it barely did what I wanted it to do. But I was proud of it. I had built something from scratch, and that was a huge accomplishment for me at the time. The next step was to get people to use it. I knew I needed feedback if I was going to improve the product, so I started reaching out to small business owners. I attended local networking events, sent cold emails, and even called up a few business owners from the yellow pages. I had no idea how to sell, but I was determined to make it work. At first, nobody was interested. Some were polite, others were downright dismissive. I remember one guy laughing when I told him about my app. "You think a tiny app like yours is going to help my business?" he said. It stung, but I didn't let it discourage me. I took his feedback, went back to the drawing board, and tried again. This went on for months. I kept tweaking the product, making small improvements based on the feedback I received. But still, I wasn't seeing any real traction. The breakthrough came when I got my first paying customer. It wasn't a huge deal, just one small business owner who saw potential in my app and decided to give it a shot. That customer meant everything to me. They were the first person to put their trust in me, and it felt like a huge validation of all the effort I'd put in. I remember jumping up and down in my living room when I saw the payment notification. That single transaction gave me the confidence to keep going. From there, things slowly started to snowball. I kept reaching out to more business owners, and as word spread, a few more customers came on board. It was still a slow grind, but I was learning a lot along the way. I eventually found a few developers to help me fix the bugs and improve the user experience. With their help, we were able to build a much more polished version of the product, and that's when things really started to take off. We improved the onboarding process, added new features, and streamlined the user interface. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. The biggest challenge, though, came when I realized I had to scale. Up until then, I had been doing everything myself: coding, marketing, customer service, finance, you name it. But as the customer base grew, I found myself struggling to keep up. I was working 16-hour days, barely sleeping, and constantly feeling like I was falling behind. The stress was overwhelming, and there were moments when I seriously considered giving up. That's when I made my next big decision. I hired my first employee. It wasn't easy. I didn't have much money to offer, and I was scared of the responsibility. But I knew I needed help if I was going to grow. The first hire was a part-time marketing manager, and she ended up being one of the best decisions I ever made. She took over the marketing efforts, which allowed me to focus on product development. With her expertise, we were able to reach a much larger audience, and the business started to gain real traction. As the company grew, so did the challenges. There were times when I felt completely out of my depth. There were moments when I doubted my abilities and thought about throwing in the towel. But I never did. I learned to trust my team, and together, we kept pushing forward. We faced plenty of setbacks: buggy software releases, customer complaints, cash flow issues. But each time we hit a roadblock, we learned something new and came out stronger. Fast forward a few years, and the company is doing well. We have a solid customer base, a growing team, and a product that continues to evolve. I've learned a lot along the way, from managing a team to handling customer feedback and even dealing with the financial side of the business. The road hasn't been easy, and I've made plenty of mistakes, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'm still learning and growing, and I'm excited to see where the business will go in the future. Looking back, I realized that success didn't come from a brilliant idea or a stroke of luck. It came from persistence, a willingness to learn, and the ability to adapt. I didn't have the resources or experience when I started, but I had the determination to figure it out. If there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's that you don't need to have everything figured out when you start. You just need to start. It's been a wild ride, and I'm grateful for every challenge and every win along the way. If you're thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple: just start. Don't wait for the perfect time. Don't wait until you know everything. Just take the leap and figure it out as you go. And when you hit those tough moments, when you want to quit, remember that persistence is often the key to success. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.